and then it just started. Great. Because when we first met with you and Sarah, she was drawn to this idea of like an impossible task, of trying to do something that that explains who you are or what you identify as, but not ever really being able to fulfill that in some way.
Okay.
So she had like originally I think the idea of wrapping herself in cling wrap and then trying to find some way to cut herself free. These sorts of weird impossibilities.
Of repetition.
Yeah.
And I think it was that part where you talked about like day in, day out, you were kind of doing this, like you're just living life just to get through it.
Right.
Yeah.
And doing what you had to survive at that time.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so I think that's where the oranges originally came from. And when we watched it, it was fascinating, but it sort of lost some of its edge when we figured out what had happened. Like, oh, okay, she's going to keep stuffing the oranges in her cheeks and put the peeled orange down.
8 oranges.
Yeah, 8.
She's a girl.
She had a bet.
She did. I bet her a 6-pack. I owe her a 6-pack. If she could fit 8 in, because she does.
No,
like
it was
6.
6. Was 7, wasn't it? It's just over 6. That's all you asked her, I think. Is how
No, she said I have 8 left in the box, and she was like, but I've only done 6 so far, and I was like, well, if you get 8.
That's awesome.
And it was funny because the audience, they went, like it was quite comical at the beginning, and then it turned into oh no, and everyone got really stressed out about it. And
her face was distorted, right? She's like making room, trying to put these pieces in. There's tears down her face.
And when she did more than like she's done 6, and when she kept on going, I started feeling uncomfortable and stressed for her.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, so I guess you as sort of you are super well involved in the contemporary art community at SFU, which
True.
Pretty much all of the performers were. So what was your sort of take on what you saw?
Okay, so through my personal lens, I guess maybe I should explain a little bit about that lens a little bit. I've grown up in the Sikh tradition. Our teachings are set to music, right? Not a lot of people can say that their actual scriptures are set to music. So I've grown up with this idea that it's not just what we say, but how we say it. So not just what we say, but how we sing it. And I was, from age 5, I learned Kirtan, which is sort of our style of devotional singing. And so at age 5, and I lived up north in northern British Columbia, there were no paid professionals and people who did it. The community ran the Gurdwara. So as kids did the musical portions of things, and so it was call and answer, and you'd sing the line, and everybody else would sing it back. So I learned like our teachings are very poetic. They're in poetic form. There's rhythm and rhyme, and different sections have different rhythms to them. So I grew up with that as sustenance, right? In little 100 Mile House, BC, and Houston, BC, and Prince George and Williams Lake, and until we hit the Lower Mainland as a 14-year-old, which is a totally different beast down here. Yeah. So I have an appreciation of poetry. I have an appreciation of interpretation, of reading something and extrapolating something much larger, and understanding that, but I still haven't hit the whole iceberg of whatever that concept was, and that's my norm. And my spiritual practice, which I then, I've adopted as an adult, it is always being okay, coming to terms with my finiteness, but understanding I'm part of an infinite, right? And being okay with that, and knowing that there's so much vast resources that I can grow in. So I've had amazing epiphanies and eureka moments, and on this journey, all over the world in terms of where I've traveled and some of the experiences I've had on a personal note in terms of just, I don't know how to, they're just magical. Like they're like these world changing, you go through some kind of experience. I don't know how to say that without getting into the details of all of them. I'm trying somehow to, right? And I can't do it justice. But so when I'm sitting there as Sukhvinder, and I know this is going to be an interpretation of my words, and I'm wide open to connect in some way to what that interpretation might mean. And so you do your first part, and it's fluid movement, and I can hear my voice in the back, and I'm thinking, I said that? Really? Oh, okay, that sounds pretty well put together. Cause that's, when you're talking, it's different hearing yourself talk back. Yeah. And I'm like, wow, I said that? Okay, this is good, okay. And then watching your movements as you're flowing with it and meeting you with that in that arena to join, I want to say, energetically to flow with you as you're doing it. I don't understand it all, right? But I'm like, okay, this is an interpretation. Oh, interesting. Okay, and then this is done, and this is done, and oh my God, I think they just said what I said when we first met. And I was like, that is so familiar. I think they're pretending. Oh yeah, that was what I said on the phone. Okay, right? And so I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. Where are we going from here? And then the next piece is with the oranges, but she starts out with the whole nutrition and how there's not healthy relationships and the talking of it. So I'm like, oh, okay, she's talking about that part. Oh, and she's putting the peels in. So that's not the nutrition. She's putting the nutrition on the floor and she's putting the peels inside of herself. Oh, got it. And she's demonstrating that as she keeps putting this in, she's getting more clogged and more clogged and more clogged until she's silenced. She can't speak no more. I was like, you hit it right on the nail. Like, she got it. That's exactly what I meant. Right? So I'm like, that's awesome. And then Dom's piece of, okay, so here's my instructions. And I'm like, oh, she's in a newsroom. And she's trying to follow and do the pieces. And now there's not enough time. And she's lost the steps. And she's trying her best. And oh my gosh, there's another story. And I was like, oh yeah, that's brilliant. Because that's reality again. So true. And so I was very much wow. You totally took the different pieces, but I felt people got the point, right? And maybe actually I should say I got the point. I got the point of what the artist was trying to, I feel, convey, but it may not have been what they meant to do, right? But I resonated and I found my own point in what they were saying. Yeah. But that is how I approach life, period. Mm-hmm. I look for the often the skill sets I bring to a board are finding the patterns, finding the connections that are under there that maybe we've gotten a little too confused or busy and we're not seeing. Mm-hmm. So I listen with that really open ear of what are the different nuances here? Mm-hmm. What's the more pieces at play? Right? Your description of what you shared, I was like, bloody brilliant again. I was like, yes, because that's exactly what happens in reality. Someone gives their heart and soul out into an interview, and then it's changed to a totally different perspective, and it's like, well, technically that is my words, but that is not what I said. Mm-hmm. Right? So again, brilliant, because that's real. That was my understanding of this project, was an exploration. I didn't think it was supposed to be a feel-good thing. Mm-hmm. I thought this was this is what media does, and let's explore and talk about that. So, yeah, that's how I felt, but I come from, I want to say perhaps, I'm a science student, cell biology, genetics major.
Obviously.
Never would have guessed.
Right? Then ran a construction company, so I got the whole financial side to who I am. But I've been singing since I was 5. I write poetry. I do, all kinds of interpretive things, and so for us, we have teachings of, it's called Miri Piri, and the idea is that you straddle two worlds. You straddle the ethereal world that's, all kinds of ideas and values and principles and teachings, but it's ethereal, and then you have a leg planted in reality, and you're having to execute what that is, and you're having to live in the world and understand how to bring that over, and then you have an experience with it, and then you go back to the ethereal world of going, wow, well, now I have a different interpretation of this teaching and of this experience, and you sit with that, and then you come back, and it's always this flow between the two, and I've worked incredibly hard to be balanced, to have both feet on the ground, straddling both worlds. And that is not something, so I don't think I can give you the typical answer because I don't think that's a typical way of living.
No. Like you're an artist, so you get into this question.
It's beautiful though.
Yeah. Because I feel like that is what art does is take that ethereal sort of theoretical and attempt in some way to make it physical.
What about this?
But it like the physical can never really live up to that like idea of what it's going to be, especially in live performance, because you cannot control all of those variables.
See, and I see that so different. I would say it is possible because you're dealing with a piece of it, and you're able to unfold it and have it be. So I would argue the opposite, that it is. My experience of life has been the taking the ethereal and bringing it into the world, and just it's this harmony. It's like this. You know, you have the experience here, you come in, and then you go here, and there's a greater experience here, and then it goes over here. I mean, I take the ethereal and I put it into business. All right, I put it into nonprofit development. I put it into family relationships and personal relationships, and so not necessarily always into typical art, right? But it is this idea of bringing the ethereal into the physical. Which I think, anyone I've met in interfaith who's a practitioner, so a Christian practitioner, a Sikh practitioner, a First Nations or Aboriginal practitioner, or Indigenous to be more accurate, because I'm thinking of all the other people I've met from outside Canada, right? To the Muslim practitioner, practitioners are a different breed of people. They take their teachings and they do their best to put it into practice, right? So we have very fascinating conversations of, well, hey, I'm working with this and I'm trying to put this teaching. It's like, oh yeah, we got that one too. How are you interpreting that one? Right? Well, I do it this way. Oh, no way. Well, here's how I do it. Oh, really? And it's like we're sharing our toolbox of here's the different things we do. So nice. But because it's a shared principle, it just opens it up for us as to how we can interpret it, right? And then different interpretations. The conversation with my Unitarian friend, United Church minister friend, he the word pilgrimage. He and I are doing a co-presentation together, and we have to. It's a congregation who's doing a world religions tour. So they decided that year they were going to get out into the community rather than having people come into their church. They were going to go visit, right? And so Will and I had the task of the first evening to prepare them so that they are ready to get on their journey, some of the challenges that they're going to be, going through, that kind of thing. And so in our conversation, pilgrimage came up, and I was like, I react to that word. I'm really reacting. He goes, how come? Tell me more, like curiosity. And I said, well, because pilgrimage, the way I interpret it is, the way I've been interpreting it all this time is you go someplace special to go find something, bigger than yourself. And really that bigger than ourselves exists everywhere and should be accessible everywhere. And he goes, that's exactly how I define pilgrimage. I go, interesting. He goes, yeah, all my personal trips have all been pilgrimage. I go, me too, actually, now that you say that. If that's how you interpret it, I go on these trips and I come back a changed person. And he goes, yeah, that's how I define pilgrimage. So interesting, but I go, that's not how everybody defines it, because if you look at it in the dictionary, it is this going to somewhere special, right? So we shared that, hey, here was something that we came across as an example. You're going to have that experience of a word that you define differently. And how do you be curious about, listening to another way to do things, right?
Yeah.
So where was I going with this? Oh, practitioners. So I think you would have similar conversations with practitioners from other traditions.
Yeah.
Because we are, it's that dance between the ethers and the reality that we do. But you will not have that conversation with followers, and you will not have that with people who worship. So no worshipers won't have that conversation, and neither will followers. In my opinion, I could be wrong, but it's been my experience.
I wonder how you would define worshipers or followers in the media, or theater context. Yes.
All of us.
But yeah, so then So then worshippers or followers then would be either the people watching TV or listening to the radio, etc., who aren't.
Well, so worshippers versus followers.
You know,
Okay, for the camera, where this is
Yeah,
American
you can move it.
presidential debate we're referencing as the worshipper follower.
The Republican presidential debate.
Yeah, a bunch of ass monkeys. Well, he teaches at a university. I don't think he
I'm sure Marcos would define it very similar.
yeah. But so then worshippers are the zealots who are here at the event. The
Yeah.
people that are holding the signs, the people that are vetted
Without
by the
questioning.
Yeah.
That's the key part. Without
Yes.
questioning. But they're worshiping to
yeah.
something higher than themselves.
And then the followers would be the people in middle America listening to the radio and going, yeah.
Without
Yeah.
question again.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. So anything that act of viewing without questioning makes you a worshipper or a follower.
Yeah, and the difference between the follower and the worshipper, I think, is the level of devotion. So a follower will follow the norm, the society, the masses, right?
Maybe it's level of participation,
Yeah.
something along those lines.
What level of, I would say, giving up your right, your responsibility to critically think. I think a worshipper is here at the top. They've completely absolved it. They put people on pedestals. They will spend so much time to make sure the myth stays alive than question or nothing, right? A follower has the ability to be disillusioned. They will follow, I think, until something really just doesn't make any kind of sense, like,
Yeah.
right? But because they're not in a worshiping mode, they didn't abdicate their responsibility to think for themselves, right? They're just path of least resistance. This is where they're at. They don't want to put the energy into questioning, etc. But they don't have. But there's still the potential for questioning because they didn't get. It might be dormant, the questioning, right? The critical thinking part, but they didn't abdicate it.
Yeah.
Whereas a practitioner practices democracy, is a practitioner of democracy. So they're gonna listen to what's being said and go, okay, well, let's go back and check this and ask questions. That didn't make sense. Really? That's how you interpret it? Because I read that and I'm not quite so sure.
Well, and so good lawmakers don't uphold the law, they question the law, and when it doesn't work, they go, is it the law or is it us?
Yes.
Right? As opposed to the law is the law,
Yes.
you know?
Yes. And so lots of followers completely in that profession. Absolutely. At all levels, whether it's policing or it's lawyers, right? Or judges, etc. Yeah.
Congressman.
Powerful. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a structure.
Yeah.
So the worship comes in because it's the I'm not going to critically think. I will really I've abdicated. It's a complete cutting away of critical thinking.
Well, and then the fallacy can never be the self, which is a scary prospect
Yes.
as well.
Right.
Like,
If you're
I can never be
responsible.
wrong, therefore I can never do any wrong.
Well, worship. So that would be being an idol, being the idol, right? But the worshiper would say they can't be wrong.
Therefore I can't be wrong.
Therefore, their word is not wrong. I'm not doing anything wrong.
Well, yeah, if I follow them,
Yes.
if I do what they say,
Yes.
I can't be wrong.
Yes. Yes, and you are.
Scary shit.
and this is so when I sit back and I look at, because I like history, right? I love looking all over the world, and that's, I mean, to me, I think one of the gifts of understanding even Indian history, right? And then being able to look at the Western world from that perspective. And then being born and raised here, do you know what I mean? And so I was never someone, I have to be honest, that had the dual conflict. So I can't relate to that part, right? Many can. I know many people who can. In fact, I think our conversation first started on that. The angry young East Indian men, right? I didn't, because Sikhi and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which came in when I was a kid, they mesh. Like there's like nothing in them that doesn't fit, right? So 500-year-old tradition and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms that we have in our country that does define a lot of what we do. I was like, oh yeah, I'm like, wow, so it's a pretty good Sikh teaching. Like there was nothing there. My conflict, I want to say, came from the hitting the culture, the South Asian Punjabi culture, and going, okay, that doesn't seem right because the teachings don't say that. And I think the greatest gift my parents gave, and they did this unknowingly, they separated culture and faith and spiritual practice. And the way they did that was they would tell us, because they'd be like, well, why can so-and-so do this who's also Punjabi and connected in some way to the Sikh tradition? And they would say, we can't because we are practicing Sikhs. We don't do that. We don't do blah because we are practicing. It's like, oh, okay, so there's this separation of culture. So here's a cultural activity they're doing. Yes, it's Indian, and yes, we're South Asian, but we're also practicing Sikhs, and we can't do that. Right? So to me, gender discrimination, I would say, I don't know what that is. I know it now, but growing up, I would argue that's not true. There is no sexism in the Punjabi community. I was my little world, right? Up North BC, there was none. Right? All the uncles, meaning the men in the community, because we called them all uncle, they would be like, oh, so what are you going to be when you grow up? Oh my gosh, you got to listen to her what she wants to be. That is so cool. Wait, let me get you need to, she's 5 years old. She wants to be right? Yeah. And I was a girl. No one told me I couldn't do anything. No one said I wasn't allowed. I sat on a stage and they'd be like, oh, sweetheart, you sang so well. That was so awesome. Oh, that was so peaceful what you said. Like, they never said I couldn't. I didn't drink, I couldn't do drugs, I couldn't, have sex before I got married. That was what they taught us as kids. And so those were the don'ts, but it wasn't, you can't think, you can't be, you can't talk your opinion, you can't debate. I mean, when the men were having political debates and stuff, as kids were sitting there and going, really? I don't know, Uncle. Right? And I'm like, no, sweetheart, I'm telling you. Like, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, really? Yes! And I was, because they call us Put, which means beloved child, right? So it's like, no, Put, I'm telling you. I'm like, Uncle, I don't think so. We didn't have Google back then. They're like, we're not going to check the library. Okay, that was how I grew up, but that wasn't how everybody grew up, right? And that was my relationship with those men who we still see at family weddings, right? We get together every once in a while. And it's like, oh, there you are. And it's like, you asked me how, I got hugged, and I still get great hugs from these people. And there's, how are you doing? And what are you up to? And did you find a partner? No, Uncle, I never did get married. That's okay, sweetheart. Nothing wrong with that. You'll find someone when you're happy, when it's the right guy for you. It's awesome. Like and the aunties too, right? Because they're like, so did you find anyone? Are we going to celebrate your marriage next? No, I haven't found it. That's okay. When it's meant to happen, when it's written, it will happen. So, what do you, like, I didn't grow up with that way, but I don't think my siblings can say the same. I was one of the first kids born into the community. With other families that didn't have kids yet, right? So I was their daughter too, right? And then they had their own kids, and so by the time my siblings came along, they have a posse of friends their age, right? And I had maybe one or two friends my age. And then, even the younger kids came, and it was so different, so for me, my growing up experience in Canada, my siblings can't say, and my cousins can't say, the younger ones, that they would agree with me. I think they would definitely say that there was this conflict between, the Sikh identity that they had and sort of living in the real world. And I was like, I didn't see it. I didn't, that was not my challenge, right? That wasn't there. So, but the culture, very much so. And I lucked out to be part of parents who are okay if I don't want to do the cultural thing. Totally fine with that. Right? Where I can say, yeah, no, Mommy, if you want to do that, but honestly, I don't think that fits the teachings. But you want it, that's fine. I'm just not going to be part of this. Right? And so I'm like, yeah, reminds me when I was a kid. Okay, you go ahead. Right? So yeah. Again, where do we start with this? I know I mentioned that. I know, it's like somewhere in there was this question.
I don't know. It's good though, eh?
We were pointing there to an example of something.
Worshippers
and followers. Right?
Donald Trump, yes.
Yeah, Madison, you had a thought?
I was just going to ask you, on this topic of worshippers and followers and people who don't necessarily know how to think critically, who are you trying to reach?
Trying to reach those people.
So,
Yeah.
my question is do you think that like as a performer, like there weren't many parameters,
Yeah.
and I got kind of to do whatever I wanted to, you know, and that's great if you're like a performer who understands that what we're trying to do is to reach those particular people.
Mm-hmm.
But do you think that that would be something to discuss prior to doing this again?
Probably.
And to be like, how do we reach this level of clarity where like these people can maybe get something out of it,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Yeah.
Or I mean, like that's a huge amount of work.
Yeah.
Right, and that's a big question that I think we deal with a lot in art and in my own,
Mm-hmm.
you know, practice as a theater artist. Like, I'm always wondering, like, how do I reach more people? How do I reach the masses of people who I know can think critically, they just don't know that they should?
Yeah.
And how do you kind of ignite that?
Yeah.
But I think that maybe if that's what you're trying to do, you know, I mean, it's so important to have like the intellectual conversations about this stuff, and to have that level of like, you know, talking to people who are, you know, practitioners and who are artists and who have that intellectual side, but maybe more research, I want to say,
Mm-hmm.
into how to do that and how to reach those people.
I mean, our goal is with the next iteration to build a toolkit so that people who aren't artists can do this project. And that's one of the things Sukhvinder and Colleen and I were sort of talking about, is working with the interfaith group to make a structure that can go literally anywhere into any community and be like, okay, you want to have a conversation? Great. Here's your starting point. And, you know, pick someone in your community who you think has a great story and then get people to look at it and make some decisions about how they want to retell that story, and then have a conversation around how that happened.
Totally.
Because one of the things that I find with art, specifically in Vancouver, but also everywhere, is that it tends to be really insular.
It's made for artists.
Yes, exactly. It's made for artists here, and it's made for artists in a lot of places. And we did find some people who are doing art that is with the community, like Anna DeVere Smith's Fires in the Mirror, is that what it's called? It was about, she took these stories from a community in Brooklyn in the 80s and 90s that had race issues because there was a black community living there and a Jewish community, and a Jewish guy ran over a black kid with his car, and the Jewish guy wasn't charged with anything, and the black kid died, and there were all these race riots, and so she went in and got stories from everybody, and then she performed them as this way of trying to like figure out what this community was. And as admirable as that model was, I think it ended up being presented to a lot of people who were in the arts world and not necessarily the people who were in the community.
It doesn't sound like the best method.
Yeah, I mean, it's problematic for sure. And then you run into things like verbatim theater, where the artist or practitioner goes into a community and gets interviews and then performs it, which is kind of what we did in this project, except that we tried to have the storyteller be more of an intermeshed part of that story. But where I think, because there was such a huge difference between the 4 p.m. show with Sukhvinder's story and the 8 p.m. show with Stacia's story, and I think part of that is that the audience for the 8 p.m. show with Stacia didn't know how to approach the topic of Aboriginal people in Canada and their experience, and they were very, very uninitiated to that, and her story was so centered around that part of her identity, where Sukhvinder's story was more open and more sort of accessible in a way because that's how you live your life. Not that Stacia isn't open and accessible, but that the way that people perceive those two stories is very different. And I would be curious to see, and I think Jenna, you and I talked about this, how the reception of Stacia's story would have been different if we'd done it with a community who is more adapted to talking about Aboriginal issues.
Okay, pause.
Pause.